All right. So, it's March and you are getting your brackets ready and
Yeah.
everything. But
Yeah.
some teams you've watched all year, just like they're right there on the edge.
Yeah.
Will they get in? Will they not? And others, it's like, how could they not be a lock?
Right.
So, what is that secret sauce and
Yeah.
why does it seem so mysterious?
Uh-huh.
Well, today we're going to take you on a little deep dive into one of the key parts of that whole puzzle, and that's the NCAA evaluation tool,
Yes.
better known as the net rankings.
Exactly. If you've ever wondered why one team gets a ticket to the big dance and another one's left out, or maybe how those seedings are determined, net is really like the central piece of that whole process.
Yeah.
Consider this your shortcut to understanding, I think, a really vital aspect of March Madness. And what we're going to do today is break down what it is, how it works, and maybe most importantly, why it seems like the selection committee puts so much emphasis and value on it.
Right, because, let's face it, there are tons of college basketball rankings out there. You've got your AP poll, you've got KenPom, all these different things. But when it comes to the NCAA tournament,
Yeah.
it's the net that seems to be like the one
It is.
calling the shots.
That's the one they use.
So we're going to get into all that, and we'll even get into how teams are trying to strategically play the net system a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, let's just start with the basics. What are the net rankings?
Okay, so the first thing to understand is that the net replaced the old ratings percentage index, or as was known as the RPI,
Right, RPI.
as the primary tool the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee uses to evaluate teams. And so it was a change that was made, I want to say back in 2018, and it's a more in-depth system that looks at a range of factors
Yeah.
to get a sense of a team's overall performance throughout the season.
And so when we say a range of factors, what are some of like the key ingredients? What is the net formula?
Yeah, so there are a few core components.
Okay.
And we're going to break those down one by one. But first, there's the Team Value Index, or TVI. And what's really fascinating here is that the TVI is really laser-focused on the quality of your wins. It takes into account not just who you beat, but where did you beat them?
Oh, okay.
Was it on your home court? Was it a true road game? Was it a neutral site game?
Got it.
And then it even starts to consider margin of victory in those games.
Mm,
So a win is not just a win.
right.
It's how valuable is that win.
So you're saying that a decisive win actually helps your ranking more than, say, like a narrow escape.
Yeah, it does factor into the equation, especially when we start to look at the efficiency metrics, which are another really important piece of the net puzzle.
Okay.
And those metrics, what they do is analyze points per possession, both for and against. And the key here is that those numbers are adjusted based on the strength of the teams that you're playing against.
Okay.
So a dominant performance against a really tough opponent is going to give your efficiency numbers a bigger boost.
So it's not just about the final score, it's about how you get there.
That's right.
And who you're doing it against. Exactly.
Okay, and then there's this whole quadrant system.
Yeah, the quadrant.
And this is where I feel like things start to get
a little wonky.
a little bit complicated. So
Yeah.
can you break that down in as straightforward a way as possible?
Yeah, so think of the quadrants as tiers of opponent quality,
Okay.
and there are 4 of them, and they are determined by your opponent's net ranking and where that game was played.
Right.
So quadrant 1 is what you're shooting for. Those are the big wins.
Yeah.
And just to give you an idea, for a home game to qualify as quad 1, you've got to be playing a team that is in the top 30 of the net.
Mm.
Now, if it's a neutral site game, then that opponent has to be in the top 50.
Okay.
And for a road game, top 75. So you see how the location starts to factor in.
Right.
So those are the marquee wins that teams are really chasing.
Got it. So those are like catching the biggest fish in the lake.
Exactly. Those are the big ones.
Okay, what about the other quadrants?
Okay, so quadrant 2 wins are still positive.
But they don't carry as much weight. And those would be home wins against teams ranked 31 through 75 in the net neutral site, wins against teams ranked 51 to 100, and road wins against teams ranked 76 to 135.
Got it.
Quadrant 3 home wins against teams ranked 76 to 160, neutral wins against 101 to 200, and road wins against 136 to 240.
Okay.
And then finally, there's quadrant 4.
All right, so these are like the bottom feeders.
These are the ones where, and this is really interesting for your listeners to know,
Yeah,
the selection committee really downplays wins in this quadrant.
like they don't even count.
They don't do much to help your tournament resume. And so this is where wins against teams ranked 161 or lower at home, 201 or lower at a neutral site, or 241 or lower on a road fall into.
That makes sense. I mean, you're not going to get extra credit for beating a team that's not expected to be very competitive.
Right.
Right? You're not beating the best of the best. So.
It doesn't carry as much weight.
Now, one thing that I know our source highlighted as kind of a hot take when it comes to these quadrant one wins was this idea that a quadrant one win in like the very first game of the season
Yes.
carries the exact same weight
That's right.
in the net as one on like the last day before Selection Sunday.
Yeah, it's equal.
I mean, wow, that really underscores that every game matters.
Every game matters.
Even ones way back in November and December.
Yeah, and it puts pressure on teams to perform consistently from the very beginning.
Yeah, you can't just be like, oh, we'll get it together by March.
That's right. And it also means that building a strong resume early isn't just about momentum, it's baked into the evaluation process.
Really interesting. Okay, so we've got the net and all these different quadrants. Let's talk about something that I feel like fans are always kind of debating about, and that is how the net rankings compare to things like the AP poll or KenPom. What's the committee really looking at?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know this is where a lot of people get tripped up.
Yeah.
So think of it this way. The AP poll, while it's very visible, it's really just a poll
Right.
of sports writers and broadcasters.
Yeah.
So it reflects their opinions. It
Yeah.
can be swayed by, narratives, hot streaks, recent big wins, big losses, and all that.
So it's more about perception in the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who looks good right now
Okay.
through the eyes of those voters?
Got it. What about something like KenPom? Because that seems to be more of a stats-based.
Yes, KenPom is a much more sophisticated statistical system that's really good for predicting how teams will perform based on their underlying efficiency.
Right.
It's a great tool for analysis, but it's not the official metric
Right.
that the NCAA selection committee uses to evaluate teams for the tournament.
Right. The net is.
Yeah.
So you mentioned an example from this past season, the 2023 season with the Houston Cougars.
Yes.
How did that really kind of illustrate what the committee prioritizes?
So Houston is a perfect example. They finished the regular season #1 in the net rankings,
Yeah.
which really reflected a strong schedule and quality wins.
Yeah.
However, in the AP poll, they were #3, but when Selection Sunday rolled around, the selection committee gave Houston a #1 seed,
Okay.
and that aligned with their net ranking. So it really just
Yeah.
goes to show you, when push comes to shove, net is what matters.
Net is the golden ticket.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're starting to really see how this net thing works. And I think it's natural to think, well, if coaches and programs are as strategic as they are they trying to game the system a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
How do teams approach their scheduling and even in-game strategy?
Absolutely. So coaches, they know how the net works.
Yeah.
And they factor into their decisions all the time.
Yeah.
So one thing is scheduling. You want to avoid scheduling games against really low-ranked teams, those quadrant 4 opponents,
Right.
because those wins don't boost you very much.
Right.
And a loss could be really damaging. So you'll see teams trying to fill their schedules with tougher opponents.
Even if it means a higher risk of losing.
Yeah, because a competitive loss to a good team isn't viewed as negatively as a blowout loss to a bad team.
Right, because you're still getting data points.
That's right. You're still playing quality competition.
Right. Okay, what else are they doing besides trying to schedule those tougher teams?
Another thing you'll see is trying to participate in those multi-team events, those neutral site tournaments.
Oh, yeah.
And that's because they bring together teams from different conferences.
Yeah.
And sometimes highly ranked teams. So you have a chance to pick up a big win.
On a neutral floor.
Yeah, exactly.
Which could be a big resume builder.
Exactly. And remember, a road win against a top 75 net team is a quadrant 1 win, and a neutral site win against a top 50 team also gets you there.
Right. Okay. So, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but margin of victory also plays a role. So are coaches telling their teams to just keep running up the score even when they have a big lead?
I mean, it depends on the coach, but generally speaking, yes.
Okay.
Because those larger margins can have a positive impact on efficiency metrics, which again are a factor in the net.
Right.
But this is where you get to some of the controversy.
Yeah.
Because some people would argue that the net might actually reward blowing out weak teams more than grinding out a tough win against a good team.
Mm.
The argument is a hard-fought victory might actually demonstrate more about your team
Right.
than just completely overpowering someone who's way worse than you.
Right.
So it's an interesting debate.
Yeah. It kind of raises the question, can just data really capture the nuances of what's happening on the court?
That's right.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the criticisms of the net rankings.
Yeah.
Because I know there are aspects that a lot of fans, and particularly people who follow those mid-major programs, find frustrating.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the biggest criticisms is this perception of bias against those mid-major conferences.
Yeah.
Teams in smaller conferences often just don't have as many opportunities to play quadrant 1 opponents.
Yeah.
because their conference schedule might not include many highly ranked teams.
Right, so it's like they're already at a disadvantage.
Yeah. And so it makes it really difficult for them to build a resume that is stacked with those big wins, even if they dominate their own league.
Yeah, it's like you're being penalized
Okay.
for not being in a power conference.
Yeah. It's
Ah.
not necessarily about how good you are. It's about who you get to play.
Right. And then that kind of ties into this weird concept of a good loss.
Yeah.
Because we talked about how losing to a really good team can sometimes be better
It can be.
than beating a lower ranked team.
Yeah.
And this is especially true for those mid-majors where they might not have many chances for those high-profile wins.
Yeah. So a close loss to a big name school could end up being one of their best data points in the net.
Which seems counterintuitive because it's a loss.
It is a loss.
It seems like it should be a bad thing, but the net is saying, well, at least you're competitive
Yeah.
with this really good team.
Yeah.
So we have an example here, the Oklahoma team from 2021. What happened there?
So the 2021 Oklahoma team is a really interesting case study because they had a record of 16-10.
Which is pretty decent.
Pretty solid, yeah. And 7 of those wins were against Quadrant 1 opponents.
Wow.
And despite this, they were not selected for the tournament.
Seriously.
And meanwhile, Michigan, who was 18-8 but had fewer Quadrant 1 wins, got in. So this really fueled the debate about, is the net really valuing those high-quality wins enough?
Yeah.
Even if they come with a few more losses.
Right. It's like, is the system actually rewarding the best teams, or is it just rewarding teams who play in a certain conference?
Right.
So, okay, we've learned all about how this net thing works and some of the controversy around it. So now how can the average fan use this information when they're watching college basketball?
That's a great question.
Huh.
I think one of the most important things to remember is to pay attention to Quadrant 1 games, because those are the games that has the biggest impact. When your team is playing a Quad 1 opponent, that's a huge opportunity for them to boost their resume.
So instead of just looking at like, okay, did they win? Did they lose?
Yep.
We need to be paying attention to who they're playing.
Exactly. And how do they perform in those matchups?
Right.
Also keep an eye out for upsets, especially those where a lower ranked team beats someone in the top 50 of the net, because those can really shake things up in the rankings and potentially impact who gets into the tournament.
So you know those Cinderella teams that everybody loves? They could really throw a wrench in things.
Exactly.
Right.
And then for those bubble teams,
Yeah.
the ones that are right on the edge, their net ranking and their number of Quadrant 1 wins are going to be really telling.
Okay.
So a bubble team with a so-so net ranking, but several big wins, might actually have a better case than a team with a slightly higher ranking, but fewer of those quality wins.
Interesting.
So you can track these bubble teams and see how their performance against those top opponents really impacts their chances.
This has been so helpful.
Yeah.
It definitely, I think, takes some of the mystery out of
I hope so.
this whole process, which can feel really confusing to fans.
It's a
So
lot to take in.
it is a lot to take in. And as we wrap up our source material, asks a very important question to you, the listener. Do you think the NCAA should change the net formula?
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is a big one. So I guess the question is the net actually doing what it's supposed to do?
And that's the debate, right?
Right.
Because they implemented the net to be more data-driven
Right.
and objective than the old RPI, and it does look at more factors.
Yeah.
But then you have those criticisms about how it might hurt mid-majors
Yeah.
or how it weights margin of victory.
Right.
So maybe there's a way to refine the formula to address those concerns,
Right.
but still keep the overall idea of using data to evaluate teams.
Yeah, it's like they're always trying to find that perfect system.
That's right.
But does it even exist?
That's the question.
All right, well, for all of you listening, we want to hear what you think.
Yeah, what do you think?
Head to the comments, let us know. Do you think the net formula needs an update?
Yeah, let us know.
And speaking of looking ahead, our source material teases another deep dive next time into why those Cinderella teams we love
I love them.
supposedly get screwed in the tournament.
Ooh, that's going to be a good one.
I know, right? So make sure you tune in for that.
Can't wait.
Thanks for joining us
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
for this exploration of the net rank.